I pulled into my father's driveway, and right away I knew something was wrong. Before I even turned off the engine, I saw it, a brand new padlock on the front door. It gleamed like a warning sign, and those floodlights, they hit me like a spotlight on a trespasser. I stepped out of my car, and my heart sank as I saw his belongings. His life really stacked on the porch, soaking in the rain like discarded junk. His old flannel shirts, the ones he wore every Sunday, were folded in a pile. The green one with the patched elbow, his coffee mugs, his framed photos, all of it out there on the wet porch, just sitting there waiting to be thrown away. And then I saw the notice. Laminated plastic stapled to the door like it was something important. Notice of property seizure in big, bold letters. I stood there, keys in hand, and realized the locks didn't even work anymore. The keys to my father's cabin, the one he'd built with his own hands, didn't fit. That was the moment I understood. Someone had decided that his death was an opportunity. I could smell my father in those boxes, the Old Spice, the cedar, the worn leather of his boots. And they were sitting there in the rain like trash. I was still standing there staring at the notice with rain running down my face when I heard a car pull in behind me. It was a white Cadillac Escalade parked directly behind my car. Blocked in. On purpose. Power move. The driver's door opened, and before I even saw her, the perfume hit me. Floral heavy, like something you'd find in an overpriced department store. She stepped out. Camel-colored blazer, pressed slacks, clipboard in hand, carrying it like a badge of authority. Behind her was a guy who looked like he belonged at a nightclub door, all thick neck and black polo shirt, his arms folded like a bouncer waiting for someone to misbehave. She didn't introduce herself, didn't ask my name, didn't say sorry for your loss. No, she looked at me like I was a dog who wandered into the wrong yard. Honey, she said, tapping that clipboard like it was the law. This property has been reclaimed by the community. I was too stunned to speak for a second. She wasn't even looking at me. She was looking at her clipboard, already moving on to the next thing like I wasn't even a person. I finally found my voice. My father died 6 weeks ago. What fees? She didn't blink, just smiled a little tighter. You should have read the bylaws before you let the fees pile up. I reached into my glove box and pulled out my father's death certificate. I'd been carrying it with me everywhere, the bank, the insurance office, the DMV, all the places where you go to prove that someone's dead. I held it up in the rain, the ink starting to blur. What kind of person seizes a dead man's home while his family is still burying him? She barely glanced at it. One quick flick of her eyes and then back to her clipboard. The board's decision is final. And just like that, she dismissed me. I stood there, keys in hand, the rain blurring my vision. The grief was still there, heavy, pressing down on me, but something else moved in behind it, something harder, more determined. She had no idea whose cabin she just stole, and she had no idea who I really was. You ever had someone take something that belonged to your family, something that can't be replaced? Drop your story below, because this is just getting started. Let me back up. My name's Jamie Hollis. I'm 52, and I work for the federal government, specifically the Department of Housing and Urban Development. My job, compliance auditor. Sounds exciting, right? It's not. I spend my days buried in spreadsheets and reports, reviewing budgets, inspecting financial disclosures. I catch people who cheat the system. It's as exciting as it sounds. At the time all of this started, I was on bereavement leave. My mom passed away years ago. No siblings, just me and my dad. And now just me. I'd been driving back and forth from D.C. to North Carolina, handling the estate, doing the paperwork, signing papers, closing accounts. The stuff no one tells you about when someone you love dies. The only thing that got me through those 5-hour drives was gas station coffee and the promise I'd made to my father. My father, Earl Hollis, was a county surveyor, worked for the county for 34 years. He knew every property line, every easement, every creek bed. He could walk a ridge line and tell you exactly where your property ended and your neighbor's began. People joked that Earl knew where your property ended better than you did. That wasn't a joke. It was a fact. My father was the one who surveyed the land that eventually became Ridgewood Pines. Back in the mid-'80s, before there was a single house, before there was a homeowners association, he mapped every lot, every setback, every drainage point. And then he bought his parcel, the one with the cabin. He didn't move into Ridgewood Pines. Ridgewood Pines moved in around him. He was there first. In 1987, a full year before the first house went up, my dad had already staked his claim. But my father didn't live to see what happened to his land. He passed away 6 weeks before I showed up to find those boxes on the porch. Cancer. The kind that starts quietly and finishes loud. The last 3 months he was in hospice, and I spent every weekend by his side holding the hand that used to drive a transit level into frozen ground. The cabin was his kingdom. He built the porch himself using reclaimed chestnut from a barn that got torn down 2 counties over. He spent summers haggling for that wood, hauling it in his truck, shaping every board by hand. In the back, he had a workshop where he spent his retirement carving walking sticks, hickory, maple, cherry. He'd give them away to anyone who needed one. Half the elderly residents of Ridgewood Pines leaned on something my father made. The kitchen had a wood-burning stove he refused to replace because, in his words, it cooks honest. The back porch looked out on the Blue Ridge Mountains, the view rolling out like God's quilt. Dad used to say, "That view keeps me honest. Can't lie to yourself when you're looking at something that old." I promised him I'd take care of the cabin. I held his hand in hospice and said, "I'll take care of your place, Dad." That was the last promise I made to him. And I drove 5 hours to keep that promise. And I found my father's life packed up in boxes with a stranger's lock on the door. The thing about grief is it doesn't make you weak. It makes you dangerous. Because once you've lost what you were most afraid of losing, everything after that is just math. So I did what any grieving child would do. I started digging. And what I found under Ridgewood Pines was a pit of rot, deep enough to swallow Denise Keller whole. Turns out Denise Keller wasn't just the HOA president. She was the weather. Everything in Ridgewood Pines revolved around her moods, her decisions. She'd been running the HOA for 9 years, reelected every single time because the bylaws she personally rewrote required all candidates to be nominated by the board. A board she handpicked like a queen picking her court. Denise didn't run an HOA. She ran a franchise. Her husband sat on the zoning commission, her brother-in-law owned the landscaping company, and her daughter worked as a property management consultant for the HOA, something that hadn't existed until she needed a paycheck. I traced the seizure back to its origin. It all came down to a $175 annual maintenance fee, a fee that had snowballed into $4,800 in charges, all because my father couldn't respond to the notice when he was in hospice dying. I walked into the HOA office the next day, and it was exactly what you'd expect. Fluorescent lights, the smell of cheap toner motivational posters that didn't inspire anyone, just made you want to leave. The office manager handed me a piece of paper, 1 sheet of thin, cheap copy stock. No invoices, no receipts. I asked for the invoices. "You'd have to submit a formal request to the board president," she said. And then Denise appeared, with that same heavy floral perfume. She sat down and explained to me slowly, condescendingly, like I was some kind of tourist in a country club. "Your father's property was becoming a blight," she said. "We acted to protect property values." She called my father's cabin, a place he'd maintained for 37 years, a blight. I walked out of that office seething. But then I went to the county recorder's office and I found out something that changed everything. There was no legal filing against my father's property. Nothing. They hadn't seized his cabin through the legal system. They'd done it through fear. I hired a lawyer, Connie Park, who wasn't impressed by Denise's games. She sent a cease and desist letter demanding that the locks be removed and the fees voided. For 48 hours, I thought it was over. The silence felt like relief, like the calm after a storm. Then I got 5 violation notices. 5. Different color-coded stickers, each one more ridiculous than the last. A $6,000 fine for a basketball hoop. A satellite dish that had been up for years without complaint. And a violation for unauthorized occupancy because I, the legal owner of the property, was living there. I wasn't about to back down. I kept digging. I started knocking on doors in Ridgewood Pines, and what I found broke me. Ruth Odom, an elderly neighbor, had been paying $300 a month for 2 years' money she didn't have for special assessments on her property. Marcus Webb had been fined $6,000 for a basketball hoop that was identical to 3 others on the block. Derek Solis, a war veteran who lost his leg in Afghanistan, had his wheelchair ramp torn out. The kicker: nobody fought back. Not because they didn't want to, but because they were scared. Scared of Denise Keller, the woman who owned half the sheriff's department and the county manager's golf buddy. But one day a neighbor handed me a phone. The audio was small and muffled but unmistakable. Denise Keller instructing her brother-in-law to inflate invoices. I had everything I needed. And that's when I took it all down.